When it comes to powdery mildew, which method is the best to control it? We're gonna put it to the test over the next few weeks to find out. Let's go. So in our garden here, we got our squash plants. We have 3 different squash plants. They're about 6 weeks old and they're looking awesome. However, what's not looking awesome is that they're starting to get some powdery mildew. Now this time of year, late summer, early fall, these plants they're more susceptible to the damp, cool nights, bringing on powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is a soil-borne fungus. That means that it comes from the soil. So if you're a gardener that thinks that, well, if I would have crop rotated or not grown my squash here and grown it somewhere else, I could have prevented it, you'd be sorely mistaken. There's not a whole lot you can do to control it other than the sprays that we're going to talk about. Now, it's starting to really take hold here, and I think it's going to give us a really good example over the next couple weeks comparing these very common, not really summer household, but just very commonly used, very readily available fungicides to control this powdery mildew. And we're going to test to find out which one works best. So when it comes to blight and powdery mildew, the objective to controlling it is essentially to spray a chemical or material onto the surface of the leaf to alter the pH. You see, right now this powdery mildew is taking advantage of the leaf surface because it has a specific pH that can host the powdery mildew fungi. And so the first thing we're going to turn to is something like baking soda. Baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, you're going to put it basically in some water, make a water solution. I use about 2 tablespoons per gallon of water. It's a nice alkaline pH. So when you spray it on the leaves, it's going to raise the pH. It's going to make it more alkaline, essentially allowing for the leaf surface to not be as hospitable for the powdery mildew. Then you have something like milk. Now milk, we're going to spray fully concentrated milk. Now, obviously milk is fairly expensive nowadays, but we're going to spray some milk on the leaves. Reason being, a lot of people say spray milk on the leaves because it's very alkaline. And again, much like the baking soda, we're going to essentially hope that the milk will alter the pH of the leaf surface enough to control the powdery mildew. Both are very common when it comes to at-home remedies for controlling powdery mildew. And I personally use baking soda all the time when it comes to controlling blight or powdery mildew. So I'm really pulling for that one. But honestly, I don't know which one is going to be best. And then last but not least, we have a commercially available, very common fungicide called Liquicop. This is just a copper fungicide. And essentially copper fungicide is going to make the leaf surface slightly more acidic. And so it's going to do the opposite. But either way, we're getting away from that baseline. If the leaf surface is 7, we want it to be like a pH of 5.5 or a pH of like 7.5. So we can alter away from that neutral pH zone that is hosting this powdery mildew here. And so we're going to try all 3. We're going to put them to the test over the next couple weeks to see which one is the most reliable, which one's the most effective, and I'm excited about it. So when it comes to controlling powdery mildew, what we're going to do is we're going to spray down thoroughly the top and the underside of the leaf. Every single leaf is going to get saturated with each solution. And what we're going to do is we're going to be really careful not to overspray. I get that this is not going to be the most thorough experiment. Like, we don't have a control necessarily. The control is just an infested powdery mildew plant. Let's put it that way. At this time of year, you saw what they look like, right? So control, it's just going to be left to its own devices. I guarantee you it would last a week and a half, 2 weeks before it starts to become completely powdery mildew covered and probably would die. So I don't really have a true control. And yes, all 3 plants are in the same bed. They're right next to each other. So I'm going to try to reduce overspray as much as possible. There's not a whole lot I can do to reducing overspray. And some leaves might be on one plant, but if they're in the general vicinity, they're going to get treated. I'm basically going to draw an imaginary wall in between the 3 plants. Each section is going to get sprayed down with each control method. So we have just the best example of how effective it is. And again, is this going to be super scientific? No, but it is going to give us a pretty, I think by the end of 2 or 3 weeks, it's going to give us a pretty definitive answer as to how effective it is. Now, I'm also going to follow up, and you're probably asking, well, how often should I follow up with these sprays? Well, you should be following up. If it rains, follow up right after the rain. If it doesn't rain, about every 3 to 4 days, you should be following up with these sprays. And if it's not proving to be effective, up the concentrate slightly. If you're doing about 2 tablespoons per gallon of water, when it comes to baking soda, go like 3 tablespoons per gallon of water, right? Just 1 more tablespoon sometimes is the big difference maker. So we're just wrapping up here with this final squash plant and the copper fungicide. We're gonna follow up in about a week to see how effective these different sprays were. And I will say as well that if we have to follow up and respray, like if it rains tomorrow, I'm gonna respray, but I'm not gonna turn the camera on to bring you guys along for that. But I will let you guys know how many times I had to respray, because I do think that is important. And so we're gonna, like I said, just let these sit here, let it do its thing, and we'll follow up in about a week. Week 2 update here on the fungicide experiment. If you remember, this plant was the baking soda, this plant was milk, and that plant was the copper fungicide. We're already starting to get some really impressive results. Now, after this, I'm gonna follow up, I'm gonna respray because it's been about a week. We did not have to follow up with a respray. We didn't get any rain, and so it just basically stayed on the plant. But I'm gonna follow up, I'm gonna respray today, and we're gonna do our second application, and then we'll follow up next week with some more results. But as is, come in close and check this out, because I'm really shocked with the results that I'm already starting to see. All right, so the first thing I wanna focus on is the baking soda. Now, if you'll notice, the top of these leaves are so clean. I mean, just incredibly clean. Almost no signs of powdery mildew. This, like for instance, this leaf last week was just covered, and you can start to see those little yellow scars where the powdery mildew once was and is no longer there. I'm very impressed. These lower leaves that were absolutely infested, look at the scars. I mean, these plants are so reduced, even after just 1 week. The lower leaves, not so much. There's still some scarring. You can see the brown spots where the powdery mildew was killed. But over here, you see these little scars here. We're starting to see some kind of pop back up, some more powdery mildew kind of crop back up on the leaf. But these yellow spots is actually the sites, the colonies of powdery mildew cultivating on the leaf surface, and we've dramatically reduced the amount of powdery mildew by probably about 60% on this plant. All right, so here's the milk. Now, obviously new leaves, pretty clean. But what I wanna look at that I think is a little more telling is some of the lower leaves that were sprayed, and I'm really not seeing any reduction whatsoever in the colonies. Also, the underside of these leaves, there's a lot of powdery mildew still on these leaves. I'm not seeing any scarring either, which that's where the powdery mildew was actually killed, like you saw with the baking soda. I'm seeing a little bit, but we're talking, I mean, at this point, I would say maybe about a 10% reduction in powdery mildew, if there is. But some of these leaves are so covered with powdery mildew that I'm not loving the results that I'm seeing. But we're gonna keep this experiment going, obviously, because milk is something that a lot of people turn to spraying down powdery mildew. And so obviously I wanna see if it works. I wanna give it its fair shake. So we're kind of monitoring this one. And this is the copper fungicide. The copper fungicide, I am blown away with the results. The top leaves, the new leaves, are completely free and clear, absolutely no signs of powdery mildew. The lower leaves, we have a tiny bit, but a lot of scarring, a lot of kind of the leaf is being greatly reduced with the amount of powdery mildew. We still have a little bit here, a tiny bit down here, but I would say overall on this plant, this is probably about a 90% reduction in powdery mildew. It is really shocking, actually. So welcome back to week 3 of this really fun experiment here. We are calling it this week simply because after 3 weeks, not only have we had really telling results, enough to give us a pretty concrete, definitive opinion on what we're seeing and the results that we're getting from different fungicides, but also at some point, all these squash behind me are going to get powdery mildew. And if they all get powdery mildew and they get powdery mildew very bad, it's not really going to be a good representation of the effectiveness. And so because we still have some warm, dry weather in the forecast, next week it's supposed to be cold and wet again, they're all gonna probably at some point get that powdery mildew, and I wanted to call it before that happens so you guys could have some actual visible cues of the effectiveness. Now, I did wanna say as well, we have not had to reapply the fungicide any more than once a week. If it were to rain, we were gonna reapply, but but I just want to let you guys know that what you're seeing is one application every week. So before we bring you guys in close and show you all the results, I wanted to also let you guys know that a lot of these fungicides, people have been widely debating to their effectiveness and will say, well, why didn't you do a higher concentration? Why didn't you do a lower concentration? Because the thing is, I wanted to keep the variables all the same. And so what I went with is the baseline application for these fungicides. Because absolutely, if you were to increase the concentration, that will also increase the efficacy, the effectiveness of the fungicide. But something like milk, which was the one we were applying to the center squash plant here, can't be increased. It's not possible to increase milk. So it'd be very unfair for us to increase the concentration of copper fungicide or increase the concentration of baking soda, because those can be increased. And so I wanted to go off of just a strict baseline, because that gives you quite literally the best, I guess, or the fairest chance for them all to show some signs of effectiveness. And so I just want to let you guys know that as well going into this, because that way you just know that you absolutely can up the concentrations of some of these. I just chose not to keep all things kind of fair. So this plant, this is the one we were treating every single week with a baking soda solution. I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed, but I'm not totally thrilled. When it comes to just the baseline amount, which is about 2 tablespoons per gallon of water, it was very effective, and it remained effective throughout the course of 3 weeks. What I found though was that the powdery mildew bounced back very fast. It just didn't really have kind of a lasting effect on the surface of the leaf. You'll notice all of the outer leaves here, that scarring, that's the dead powdery mildew. That shows that it's very effective. All of the younger leaves that were sprayed, they're still pretty unaffected. They're still pretty healthy. But these lower leaves here, they're gonna spread this powdery mildew to these newer leaves, and it's going to be just an uphill battle to really fight this. It was very effective, but like I said, it just kept coming back a whole lot faster than I would have preferred. This plant here, this is the one we were treating every single week with milk. We were just spraying pure milk, nothing else, onto this plant. So when it comes to the milk plant, I've got to say I am really, really underwhelmed. As you can see, very aggressive powdery mildew formation, very little scarring. I mean, maybe a tiny bit, but really poor performance. Newer leaves here, it's not even really acting as a preventative. These newer leaves are getting it almost right away. Even the center of the plant on the stems, you'll notice it is on the stems. It is so aggressive on this plant. It's almost as if we've done nothing at all. And this plant here, this is the one that was getting a weekly treatment of copper fungicide. So when it comes to the copper fungicide, it is the real deal. As you can see, there is hardly any powdery mildew. You can see the old scarring where there was some. Even on the older leaves, they have almost completely bounced back, have absolutely no powdery mildew colonizing even the lower leaves. There is some on the undersides of the leaves, but if we were to coat those better, that probably would be, that would definitely resolve that. The tops of these leaves here, 98, 99% improvement. It's unbelievable. And on top of that, even the new leaves aren't showing any signs of powdery mildew. So I gotta say, I am thoroughly, thoroughly impressed with the copper fungicide's performance. All right, so what have we learned? Well, the first thing we've learned is that milk, under any circumstances, is not a good fungicide. If you hear of someone saying that milk was an effective fungicide, I would question them on how it was applied, when it was applied, because there could be a lot of room for potential placebo. And what I'm really getting at with a placebo effect is that in many cases, if you have a bout of cold weather, any type of plant that is susceptible to a soil-borne fungus, whether it be early blight, late blight, powdery mildew, it doesn't matter if it's a tomato or a zucchini or really anything. If there are conditions that are favorable for a short period of time and it's an outlier, like let's say it was late June or early July, but it was cold and damp, you can get a small occurrence of powdery mildew. But once the weather becomes more favorable again, it becomes drier, it becomes warmer, those conditions are not favorable for the development of powdery mildew. and you'll find that those older leaves will die and drop off and the newer leaves will be fine, giving you a potential for a placebo where someone may say, well, my powdery mildew was cured through applying milk. And I'm not saying that's 100% the case, but that would be my leading suspicion, because in this, and obviously this is one plant, this is not across 10 or 20 plants, so there's some room for some mistakes to be made there or whatever, but I do not find milk in this case to be, I just don't find it to be very effective. I also was really surprised by the efficacy of baking soda. For the simple cost of it and the accessibility of it, I was very impressed. Now, I would say that it would be far more effective as a preventative than as a control. Once you actually have powdery mildew, like in all three of these cases, we already had powdery mildew forming on week 1. The plants had already contracted, it was already on the leaves, and the conditions were already favorable for its development. And so once we started applying the copper fungicide, that is really the telling difference as to how fast the powdery mildew bounced back on the leaves. Once we had powdery mildew developing, it started forming really quickly, and it was hard to fully eradicate. And so in that case, I would say spraying up to 2 times a week with a very light solution of baking soda would be great, and start spraying before you even see the powdery mildew. That is the case in which I would advocate for using baking soda as a very effective fungicide. It just did not have lasting power on the leaves. And then the final thing I would say, the final thing we learned here is that while there are products that are accessible, and while there are products that are at home, I still reserve the opinion to say that technology and our developments in science has given us tools as gardeners, as organic gardeners, that can give us such amazing results with fungicide control, and you really cannot argue with the results that were here. We went from about 50% contraction on all plants, 50% of the plants, of the whole plant, right, had powdery mildew, down to maybe 2 to 5% coverage on this plant, 85 to 90% coverage on the milk plant, and maybe like 30 to 40% coverage on the baking soda plant. And you just can't argue with those results. It is very telling. And so I hope you guys learned something. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video around with a friend. I just think there's so many people that talk about using milk that this video alone will be helpful for them to hopefully just use milk for their cereal. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. Take care. Bye. Hey, thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, consider clicking this one. You'll probably enjoy it just as much. I want to thank you for your viewership, because without it, this channel would not be as amazing as it is. Also, if you haven't subscribed, consider subscribing. It's free, and we upload videos every Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. We also have vegetable seeds, fertilizer, or tools. If you need any of those, consider visiting MIgardener.com. Links will be in the description box below. We've got you covered. And as always, we'll see you all in the garden. Take care. Bye.